April 5th, 1242. Dawn unfolds across Lake Peipus, like a breath turned to glass. Beneath a colorless sky, the frozen lake stretches into oblivion. Smooth, endless, treacherous. From above, the first silhouettes appear. Armored riders in white cloaks, their iron hooves striking sparks against frost. Each impact rings sharp, echoing across the emptiness. The wind howls, flinging shards of snow into their eyes. Yet the Teutonic banners press forward, black crosses glinting in the glare. On the far side, the Russians wait in silence, faces half-shadowed beneath fur hoods. Arrows rise, short, fast, precise, and the first clash sounds like the lake itself breaking. A horse screams, the ice cracks, and a night vanishes into darkness. The battle has begun, not upon earth, but upon a living mirror, one that remembers every step. They had come from the west, from the cold stone halls of Livonia and Prussia, men sworn not only to conquest, but to salvation by steel. The Teutonic order, born as monks and healers in Jerusalem, had remade itself into a machine of war. Chainmail shimmered like scales of faith, white surcoats stitched with the black cross of God's chosen. To them, this was no campaign. It was cleansing. Each village burned was a soul purified, each pagan slain a step toward heaven. Their chronicles would later call it the Livonian Crusade, but on the ice it was simpler. A march of iron and arrogance. In candlelit monasteries, brothers forged their swords beneath Latin prayers. On the map, arrows pointed east, toward Novgorod, toward glory. They believed their armor was divine proof. But faith, that day, would find its weight tested by water. He was barely 22, a prince more scholar than soldier, his name already whispered as both hope and heresy. Alexander Nevsky of Novgorod stood apart from his knights, his gaze fixed not on the enemy, but on the horizon, calculating. He knew two worlds pressed upon Rus, the Mongol horde from the east, and the Crusader zeal from the west. Between them, his people would drown unless he chose which storm to face. So he bowed to the Khan and turned his sword westward. Around a low fire, his commanders waited, faces gleaming with sweat and fear. They trust in armor, he murmured, tracing the map in ash. Let the ice decide who it favors. Later, the church would call him Saint Alexander, but that morning he was simply a man of cold foresight, standing on a lake that would soon become a graveyard of pride. This was no simple border war. It was a collision of heavens. To the Crusaders, orthodoxy was rebellion, an empire of mistaken icons. To Nevsky, the Latin cross was intrusion, a sword cloaked in scripture. Papal bulls had blessed these northern invasions, calling them holy work, to bring the true faith to the lost Slavs. Yet beneath every sermon lay a ledger: land, tribute, souls. Villages burned, their churches rebuilt in Latin stone. Old saints were scraped from fresco walls, their faces replaced by foreign halos. Between these faiths, peasants wept, not for God, but for safety. On the ice that morning, prayers rose in two tongues, both claiming the same Christ. And somewhere above, perhaps, silence, for even heaven seemed to hold its breath as men killed for the right to define its name. The frozen expanse was no accident. It was a lure. Nevsky knew the Teutonic knights, their weight, their blindness to terrain. They expected submission, not strategy. Spring had begun its quiet rebellion beneath the frost, turning the lake into a thin shield of deceit. He positioned his infantry on the eastern shore, light and quick, while his cavalry hid in the forested ridges, waiting for the signal. When the Crusaders advanced, the center would give way, drawing them deeper onto weakening ice. It was the oldest trick in war. Let arrogance march itself to ruin. A scout's heel pressed down, and the surface groaned, the faintest whisper of water below. Nevsky watched the horizon shimmer with approaching lances and thought, the lake will remember every hoof. He wasn't fighting the knights. He was fighting their certainty. The clash came like thunder trapped in glass. Lances met shields. Swords rang against bone. The frozen air split by screams and iron. For an hour the battle swayed, until the sound changed. Beneath the knight's heavy charge came a new rhythm, cracking, splintering, the heartbeat of the lake giving way. A horse plunged, flailing, dragging its rider into the black. Then another and another. The frozen plain became chaos. Hooves skidding, armor dragging men into drowning weight. To the Russians, it was as if the earth itself had joined them, swallowing the invaders whole. Underwater, the light vanished, replaced by the muffled echo of prayer and panic. Above, Nevsky raised his hand. the retreat feint complete, the trap closed. The cross of the order, once bright, now sank beneath its own reflection. By noon, the wind had stilled. Where the Teutonic banners once shone, now only fragments floated. Splintered lances, torn cloth, faces frozen beneath the ice like saints in glass coffins. The survivors limped westward, armor clotted with frost, breath steaming in defeat. Nevsky stood at the water's edge, watching the last ripples fade into stillness. The lake had reclaimed its silence, but not its innocence. Across its surface, a single cross jutted from the ice, crooked, half submerged, catching the dying light. For a long moment, no one spoke. The men of Novgorod knelt not in victory, but in awe. The world felt smaller, the sky heavier, as if heaven itself had frozen for what it had witnessed. In the chronicles of Europe, the battle on the ice would vanish into margins, a minor note between crusades. No triumph songs, no papal lament. The West could not afford to see its holy army drowned by peasants on a lake. But in Russes, the story became scripture. Nevsky's name rose from whispers to legend, his victory painted on monastery walls, his calm immortalized in chant. Centuries later, Eisenstein's lens would resurrect the ice, Soviet light flashing off medieval armor, and the prince reborn as symbol of defiance. Yet history, like water, forgets unevenly. The West forgot the sound of ice breaking. The East remembered every crack. Between them remains that frozen mirror, the place where faith met frost and learned humility. In the north, where the Volkhov River curls beneath silver mist, stands Novgorod, a city ruled not by kings, but by its own voice. Bells, not crowns, call the people to the Vesh. Their echoes roll across timber roofs and frozen waterways, summoning merchants, priests, and farmers alike to argue the fate of their republic beneath the domes of St. Sophia. In the market square, snow mixes with sawdust and fur, sable, ermine, fox, traded for Baltic silver and honeyed mead. Children trace Cyrillic letters into frost while monks paint halos with trembling hands. No feudal chains bind this city. Its strength is noise and faith. Its walls made of words as much as wood. Here, freedom rings like iron against ice, loud, imperfect, and utterly alive. Before the Crusaders came the horsemen. From the east they rode. No banners, no mercy, only the hiss of hooves over ash. Cities like Ryazan and Vladimir vanished beneath fire. Their bells melted into slag. Smoke clung to the clouds for months. Those who lived carried silence instead of song. Children flinched at thunder, thinking it hooves. The Mongols did not stay long. They did not need to. Tribute became their shadow, and Russes bent beneath it. In the chronicles they are written as a storm, faceless, inevitable, divine punishment. But their true legacy was fear. A fear that hollowed cities and turned men toward prayers more than swords. And in that hollow, something darker began to stir from the west. Another army, cloaked in faith, certain that its God was the only one worth dying for. While the east burned, the west watched and plotted. In Rome, papal seals glistened red beneath candlelight as scribes inked a new crusade. The enemy was not Saracen or pagan this time, but the Christians of the north. Those who crossed themselves from right to left, who sang in strange tongues, who defied the Pope's word. The Livonian Crusade, born from piety and hunger, became the Church's quiet conquest of the Baltic. The Teutonic order, armoured in faith, took the lead. Priests with swords, diplomats with fire. Letters from Pope Gregory IX called them soldiers of salvation. But in truth, these knights were merchants of dominion, trading souls for silver, faith for land. Across the snows of Livonia, stone churches rose where wooden icons once stood, each block a sermon in Latin carved into a Slavic silence. In the winter of 1240, the white cloaks came, their banners crossed with black, their hymns colder than the air. Scoff fell first. Its wooden walls burned, its bells ripped down and melted into crucifixes. In the ruined churches, Latin prayers echoed where Slavonic chants had been sung for centuries. Icons were crushed under mailed boots, their painted eyes scattered into snow. The fortress of Izborsk followed, its defenders hanged beneath their own ramparts. To the Crusaders, it was victory. To the locals, apocalypse in silk and steel. Word reached Novgorod by the river. The West had come not to convert, but to erase. And in every village that burned, the wind carried the same whisper. Who will stand for Russes? Salvation was now a promise written in gold. Papal legates stood before armoured congregations, parchment raised like relics. Those who fought in Livonia would earn heaven, as surely as those who bled in Jerusalem. The north became a mirror of the Holy Land, its forests, deserts of snow, its lakes, seas of faith. For every drop of blood spilled east of the Baltic, the sinner's slate would be wiped clean. The knights listened, their eyes reflecting candlelight and ambition. Pilgrim crosses were stitched onto tunics, but behind them lay hunger for land, for dominion. The gospel became a battle plan. Redemption wore chainmail. Even God, it seemed, had a frontier to expand. They found him beyond the Volkhov, in exile. A prince younger than most of his captains, older than his years. Alexander Yaroslavich had once saved Novgorod from the Swedes on the Neva, yet politics had driven him into silence. Now, with Pskov fallen and the cross of the West rising too close, the city that cast him out begged his return. Snow fell in thick, forgiving silence as he rode back through the gates, his cloak heavy with frost. The people watched, not cheering, not sure. His eyes, pale and steady, did not meet theirs. He went straight to the cathedral, knelt before the icons, and whispered something only the saints heard. The bell of St. Sophia rang again that night, its sound not of celebration, but of resolve. Two worlds breathed opposite prayers. In the German camps, armour gleamed in torchlight, every link polished by discipline. Monks murmured Latin over rows of sharpened blades. Commanders mapped their conquest on stretched parchment. Across the river, Novgorod's men gathered under wooden roofs, cloaks of fur thick with snow. Their breath smoked as priests swung incense, filling the cold air with cedar and song. Horses stamped beside sleds laden with spears and icons. The Teutons believed in order, geometry, hierarchy. The Russians believed in earth, endurance, and the mercy of frost. Between them lay not just a frontier, but two visions of God. And as the nights grew longer, both armies waited for dawn. Each convinced heaven would open on their side first. Winter deepened until sound itself froze. The rivers stopped moving. The air thickened with stillness. Beneath the stars, Lake Peipus slept. Vast, white, deceptive. Wolves padded over its surface, unaware that they trod upon tomorrow's grave. Around Pskov's broken gates, snow gathered on abandoned helmets. Wind sighing through arrow holes like breath through bone. The Teutonic order prayed for conquest. Nevsky prayed for endurance. Between them, the lake waited. Mute, patient, perfect. When spring came, it would not melt with peace, but with blood. February 1242. The northern wind carries the rhythm of iron. From Livonia, Andreas von Feldkirchen marshals his host, 2,000 knights, sergeants and Estonian auxiliaries bound by oath and indulgence. The Teutonic banners rise like frozen suns, black crosses stark against the white horizon. The air hums with prayer and the grind of wheels. Monks march between wagons, their chants colliding with the hiss of harness leather and the low groan of carts over snow. Every hoofbeat is a psalm, every footstep an echo of destiny. This is not a raid, it is judgment. They move with clockwork precision, each formation gleaming beneath the pale sky. Armoured men and war horses layered in frost, moving as one. A living cathedral of steel and obedience. Behind them, the forests whisper in fear. Before them, Novgorod waits, unaware that the hammer of heaven has begun its descent. Across the frozen rivers of Rus, another fire gathers. Alexander Yaroslavich moves with the certainty of survival, summoning Novgorod's militias and Vladimir's spearmen, sending envoys into the steppe to call the horse archers who once raided his borders. Now they ride for him. Under the same sky, men of fur and men of mail share the same flame. Eating from the same iron pots, praying to different gods. Orthodox priests raise icons beside pagan totems, and no one argues, for they know what comes. Alexander rides among them, silent but burning with intent, his breath forming clouds that vanish like doubts. His gift is not just the sword, it is the art of gathering what should not stand together. By night, campfires bloom across the snowfields like constellations. The prince watches them flicker and knows that, for the first time, Rus breathes with one heartbeat. Through forests thick with ice and silence, the crusaders advance, their armour clanking like distant thunder. Snow swallows their wheels, and the pines close in like a trap. Scouts vanish into shadows, their bodies found days later with arrows frozen in their backs. The Teutons push forward, slower now, their discipline fighting the forest itself. Every tree is an ambush. Every whisper hides an eye. Ahead, Alexander's outriders glide between branches like ghosts. Strike, fade, return. Their hoofprints erased by snow before sunrise. It becomes a battle without clash, a duel of distance. The Crusaders must find open ground before their strength bleeds out in frost. Alexander must lead them there without being caught. Between them lies only the creak of trees and the soft drum of hearts measuring the seconds before spring. The forests open into emptiness. Lake Peipus lies ahead, a mirror of sky and snow, infinite and deceiving. Alexander stands on its edge, wind tugging at his cloak, eyes narrowed against the light. He sees what Feldkirchen cannot, the perfect field where arrogance becomes weight. Here, cavalry cannot charge without sinking, and the Teuton strength will turn to their ruin. He orders his men to make ready, archers in the front, Druzhina behind, riders to the flanks. Beneath them, the ice murmurs like something alive. To fight on a lake is madness, yet it is the only ground left that answers to no kingdom but the cold. Maps burn in the fire. Prayers are short. The prince looks once more across the vast white void and whispers to himself, "Let them come." At dawn, the army spreads across the ice like ink on parchment. Archers form the first line, cloaked in frost, their breath rising in slow rhythm. Behind them, the Druzhina stand mounted, silent, armoured, patient. To the flanks, the steppe riders wait behind snowbanks, their bows already drawn. The wind moves between them like a voice, low, metallic, prophetic. No drums, no horns, only the creak of frozen leather and the dull thud of hooves testing the ice. Alexander walks the line, his eyes unreadable, the air around him shimmering with cold. He stops, kneels, presses a gloved hand to the surface. Beneath, the ice groans, thin in places, strong in others. Perfect. He rises, nods once, and the signal passes wordlessly through the ranks. Every man inhales, holds. The lake breathes with them. The wind shifts. A low vibration rolls across the lake, faint, rhythmic, growing. Snow lifts from the surface in slow spirals, revealing shadows within the mist. Shapes begin to form. First crosses, then banners, then iron. The Teutonic host emerges like a moving wall, sunlight flashing from lances. Their chant rises deep and relentless, a tide of faith rolling over the frozen world. The Russians hold their ground, eyes wide, the silence between heartbeats stretching thin as ice beneath their feet. Even the wind seems to retreat. Alexander's breath clouds before him, slow, steady. He does not move. Across the horizon, the Crusaders lower their lances. Two worlds meet on a mirror of death, and the frost itself seems to wait for the sound of the first charge. The Teutonic line forms with surgical precision, a wedge of iron and conviction cutting through the blizzard. The pig's head, as they name it, narrows to a brutal point, lances angled forward, shields interlocked, horses breathing steam like war drums in the air. Feldkirchen's voice rings through the cold. A single command, and the wedge begins its charge. The sound rises, a deep metallic roar that drowns even the wind. Arrows strike and shatter against steel. Then the collision, a thunderclap of flesh, wood, and bone. Russian shields splinter, men stumble. The front line bends under the weight of armoured righteousness. For a moment it seems the Crusaders will pierce through everything. Faith, flesh, frost. But beneath their hooves, the lake trembles, groaning like something ancient remembering pain. Victory feels close, too close, and already the ice beneath them begins to whisper otherwise. The Russian centre yields, not in fear, in precision. Step by step, they retreat across the gleaming expanse, giving the knights exactly what they want. Open ground and overconfidence. Feldkirchen orders pursuit, and the wedge surges deeper, faster, blind. Then, a sound cuts the wind. Horns, one, then two, then dozens, echoing from the flanks. From the snow ridges burst the horse archers, step-born, fur-cloaked, eyes like iron. Their arrows hiss in perfect rhythm, a rain of black feathers slicing through the white. The Teutons falter, formation twisting, turning toward the sound, realizing too late that the lake stretches endless beneath them, and the enemy is everywhere. Around them, Russian banners unfold like wings of fire across ice. The trap, so long in silence, now sings. In the sudden swirl of snow, direction vanishes. The Crusaders turn in circles, shouting orders that die in the wind. Arrows fall in graceful arcs, not chaos but choreography. A knight raises his shield, only for a shaft to pierce the slit of his visor. Another horse crashes sideways, its rider skidding across the slick surface, mace spinning from his grasp. The air smells of iron and frost and fear. Feldkirchen looks around and sees nothing but white. White sky, white lake, white death closing in. The wedge that once split armies now collapses under its own weight. The ice beneath groans louder, splintering like glass under a giant's heel. The Crusaders realize they have no ground left, only a reflection waiting to swallow them. A single line crawls across the lake, faint, delicate, final. It spreads like lightning, branching beneath hooves and bodies. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the world opens. Horses scream, men vanish, banners fold and sink. The sound is not explosion, but implosion, a gasp of the earth taking back its own. Through the chaos, a Teutonic standard drifts beneath the surface, its black cross bending in the current. Bubbles rise like prayers too late to reach heaven. The lake closes again, sealing the dead in glass. Above, only snowflakes move, slow, indifferent, falling over a battlefield that no longer breathes. What remains of the Crusader host flees westward, a broken line of armor and terror dragging itself toward Pskov. Behind them, the Russians give chase, their cries no longer orders but vengeance. Hooves hammer across ice and powder, wind lashes faces raw. The sun is low, its pale light cutting across the plain like a blade. One by one, the pursuers close the gap. Sabers flash, horses collide, the air fills with steam and blood. There is no formation now, no command, only instinct. The Teutons run for survival, the Russians ride for memory. By dusk, the snow bears no tracks, only dark smears where iron met flesh. The lake lies far behind, silent again. But its echo follows them in the hooves of the avengers. When the noise dies, Alexander rides alone across the frozen expanse. The air is thick with mist and memory. Around him lie fragments, broken spears, torn cloaks, crosses half buried in frost. His horse breathes clouds of steam that vanish into nothing. He dismounts before a sunken banner, its black cross glimmering faintly beneath the ice. For a long moment he watches it drift in silence. Then his voice, low but steady. Let them know. Russia stands on its own faith. The words hang in the wind, heavy as iron. Snow begins to fall again, covering armor, bodies, wounds, erasing all but the stillness. From beyond the hills, the first notes of Orthodox chant rise, slow, mournful, eternal. The lake sleeps once more, and the world remembers what pride forgot. The storm has passed, but the battlefield does not move. Dawn stretches long shadows across the ice where men and horses remain locked mid-stride. A frozen sculpture of violence halted mid-breath. Swords lie half-drawn, mouths open as if still shouting. The wind has died. Even the crows keep their distance. Beneath the thin veil of frost, faces blur into reflections, armor dulled by snow. A gloved hand juts upward from the ice, palm turned skyward, as though reaching for mercy that never came. The silence is unbearable. Not peace, but exhaustion made eternal. Across the lake, steam rises in faint ribbons where the ice has cracked, whispering the first signs of thaw. The battle is over, yet the field feels alive with ghosts, each breath of morning air stirring the memory of motion that will never return. When the chroniclers came, they found no single truth, only fragments. Some wrote that 1,000 crusaders fell, others counted far fewer. It did not matter. The numbers were less than the lesson. On that lake, pride met patience and patience endured. The Teutonic order, once invincible, lay buried beneath its own armor. The chronicler of Novgorod inked it simply. On the ice, God judged between the proud and the patient. His words froze into legend, copied on parchment until fact dissolved into faith. The West would call it a skirmish. The East would call it deliverance. And between those two versions, the lake remained impartial, cold, translucent, eternal. The wind carried no victor's song, only the brittle sound of quills scratching the memory of judgment into history's indifferent skin. By the next day, the living were gathered. The wounded shivered beside the dying, and from among them, Alexander chose his statement. Common prisoners, Estonian conscripts, servants, the unknighted, were released to return home, messengers of his restraint. But the Teutonic knights, men of rank and creed, were bound in chains, not in cruelty but in ceremony. Their captivity was a sermon, strength tempered by mercy, faith proven by discipline. As they were marched west across the snow, The clink of iron echoed like a bell tolling both warning and forgiveness. One Estonian fell to his knees, sobbing thanks as he was freed. Alexander said nothing. His mercy was deliberate, a story sharper than any sword, one he knew would travel farther than the wind itself. When spring sun reached Novgorod, the city's bells rang until the river shook. Through the melting streets came riders bearing the papal banners, white cloth heavy with the stains of battle. They were raised not in mockery, but in reverent awe, symbols of a world turned back by faith and frost. The people knelt, not in triumph but in gratitude. In the square, priests swung censers thick with incense, the smoke curling upward into the thawing air. Children touched the tattered cloth as though it were relic, not conquest. The banners hung beneath the cathedral bells, dripping meltwater like tears. It was not celebration that filled Novgorod that day, but survival, the quiet knowledge that they had outlasted both winter and empire. Then the thaw came. Day by day, the ice surrendered its secrets. Cracks widened, swallowing swords, shields, and faces. Spears drifted down like reeds, vanishing into the deep. The lake's mirror blurred, its cold memory softening into water once more. By summer, lilies floated where cavalry once fell. Fishermen cast their nets, pulling up rusted mail in silence. No markers stood, no graves were made. Only the wind remembered their names, carrying them briefly over the waves before losing them to distance. The lake had done its duty. Now it forgot. In the chronicles of Europe, the battle faded to rumour. Latin scribes wrote cautiously, or not at all. For the Teutonic order, it was an error best unspoken. But in the east, fires burned each year to retell it. Songs of Nevsky, saint of ice and endurance. Centuries later, when nations rose and fell, his name still lingered like a prayer carved into stone. The West forgot the sound of cracking ice. The East built cathedrals upon it. What survived was not conquest, but the quiet defiance of memory. As snow falls once more across Lake Peipus, the chant returns, distant, human, endless. The screen darkens to the sound of water breaking beneath thawing ice, and somewhere between silence and faith, history exhales. In the years that followed, the Teutonic order spoke little of the lake. Their chronicles grew careful, their banners fewer. What had begun as a holy march into the east ended at Peipus, not with a trumpet, but a silence that settled over their fortresses like dust. The Livonian strongholds tightened their gates. New walls rose along the Baltic coast, built less for conquest than for memory. Knights once bred for expansion turned instead to defense, praying behind stone and iron. The dream of baptizing Rus by sword dissolved into cautious diplomacy, and the Northern Crusade froze in place. The wind off the lake carried no triumph, only the soft creak of retreating armor. History did not call it defeat, yet no crusade of the West ever dared that frontier again. The ice had spoken, and the West had learned to listen. From the snows of Novgorod rose a legend. Alexander Yaroslavich became Alexander Nevsky, of the Neva, named for the river that first witnessed his resolve. Over centuries, his story grew from chronicle to creed. The Orthodox Church canonized him as defender of the faith, his image painted in gold and vermilion, eyes solemn beneath a warrior's helm. Later, Tsars would march under his banner. Soviet soldiers would salute his bronze likeness as a saint of the motherland. His victory on the ice became more than history. It became inheritance. Across eras, his name meant resistance, a reminder that faith could be shield, and patience, a weapon. Even now, his face endures in icon and monument, not as conqueror, but as the quiet guardian who turned a frozen lake into a mirror of eternity. Alexander understood what few ever do, that landscape is language, and nature, the oldest ally. Where others saw a battlefield, he saw a living trap, wind, frost, and water conspiring in silence. He fought not against the land, but with it, wielding ice as weapon, snow as shield. The Teutons brought steel and doctrine. Nevsky answered with patience and the geometry of Thor. Every ripple beneath that frozen plain had been part of his strategy. Every breath of cold, a soldier in his ranks. Centuries later, generals would call it environmental warfare, but the lake had known first. It was the kind of victory that belonged not only to men, but to the place itself, where the earth rose quietly to protect its own. Today, Lake Peipus lies quiet, its surface silver under a sky the colour of lead. Beneath it sleep the remnants of that morning, rusted links, fragments of cross-hilted swords, bone turned pale as pearl. No monuments mark their rest, only the current remembers, tracing slow circles over what once was fury. Sunlight drifts through shallow waves, catching on metal long surrendered to silt. The world above moves on, fishermen casting lines, clouds reflected in the same mirror that once broke beneath kings. The lake keeps its secrets. In its depths, memory hums without sound, echoing the breath of all who fell, believing they walked on solid ground. The battle on the ice endures not as tale of conquest, but as a map of meaning, how humility triumphs where arrogance stumbles, how unity can outlast empire. Nevsky's lesson was not for soldiers alone. It was for all who believe strength is louder than stillness. The lake remains the teacher, unyielding, unhurried, shaping victory not through force, but through reflection. Its frozen veins, now thin and delicate, seem to seal the story shut each winter, then reopen it with every thaw. Across centuries and battlefields, the pattern repeats. The strong advance, the patient endure. And somewhere beneath the noise of history, that faint cracking sound returns. The reminder that every empire stands upon ice. Empires march until the earth itself says no. On this lake it did. The armies of faith met the limits of frost, and the frozen world answered with silence. No trumpets, no treaties, only water reclaiming what pride had lost. From that day onward, Peipus became more than a place. It became a threshold. Each ripple whispers the same warning, that the ground beneath power is never as solid as it seems. The camera drifts high above modern waters, calm, endless, indifferent. Beneath, faint shapes stir, the silhouettes of nights dissolving into reflection. The clouds above fold into the ice below, heaven and earth mirrored, indistinguishable. The chant fades. The lake remains, and in the stillness, the world remembers the moment it turned back.